You can talk to my wife. She can probably explain to you that I'm not quite perfect, okay? I'm just wanting you to know that. Not that that's any surprise to anybody here, but we love Pastor Chris and Christy and their families. They were always so dear to us. They're in Garden City, the Baker and Brady crew, and we've had some great times together, no doubt about that, and we're going to continue to do that. And our heart is to help rural America and to help you as a church engage even more into the lives of people in Agra and the surrounding areas. And we did bring you some gifts. One of your, I think, was it Sam that took it? Yeah, so he's probably eating all the candy, but we got some gifts for you. I just wanted you to know that. If you're missing candy, then he took it, okay? I just want you to know that, Christy. Unlike, my kids aren't perfect, and yours aren't either, probably. It's just a guess, anyway, on that one. But, man, it is so good to be here. Little did I know that this was going to be the case, that I'm sharing today, and Pastor Chris isn't here, but we're going to still continue to pray and believe that God's going to put him right back on his feet, and we're going to keep going forward, correct? That's certainly our heart. And our heart is small towns, big possibilities. We love small town America. And our emphasis is this, and I'll do this quick because I've got more of a message, even though I'm going to intertwine some rural compassion storylines in it. But our emphasis is we want to teach, train, and resource rural pastors and churches so they'll be more intentional and systematic in their outreach approach. And our heart is, what can we do to help that rural church connect outside the four walls? That's really what our heart is. So this morning I'm going to talk about something that's near and dear to my heart, and I believe it's your heart, and hopefully that we can grow in this. And that is, what can we do to meet needs, continue to meet needs in our community? And I'm going to base it on John chapter 6. If you have a Bible, you might want to turn there. If you got a Bible app, you can turn to that. John 6, verses 1 through 13. It's a great story of the feeding of the 5,000. We're very familiar with it. I've entitled this 5 Biscuits and 2 Sardines. You know the story, but 5 biscuits and 2 sardines. But here's what John 6 1 through 13 says, sometime after this, Jesus crossed over the other side of the Sea of Galilee. It was also called the Sea of Tiberias. A large crowd of people followed him. They had seen the signs he had done by healing sick people. Then Jesus went up to a mountainside. There he sat with his disciples, and the Jewish Passover feast was near. Jesus looked up and saw a large crowd coming towards him, so he said to Philip, "Where can we buy bread for these people to eat?" He asked this only as to test Philip. He already knew what he was going to do. I think that's kind of an interesting little sideline there. Philip answered, "Suppose we were able to buy enough bread for each person to have just one bite. That would take more than a half year's pay." Another of the disciples spoke up. It was Andrew, Simon Peter's brother. He said, "Here's a boy with 5 small loaves, 5 biscuits of barley, of bread, and 2 fish, 2 sardines. But how far will that go with such a large crowd?" Jesus said, "Have the people sit down." There was plenty of grass in that place. They sat down. About 5,000 men were there. Then Jesus took the loaves and gave thanks. He handed out the bread to those who were seated. He gave them as much as they wanted. He did the same with the fish. And when all had had enough to eat, Jesus spoke to the disciples, "Gather up all the leftover pieces." He said, "Don't waste anything." So they gathered what was left over from the 5 barley loaves. They filled 12 baskets with pieces of left by those who had eaten. So today what we're going to look at is 4 questions that we could ask ourselves about meeting needs. Number 1 question out of this, as I see this, is 1, are we problem-driven or are we solution-driven? Now, if you remember the first part of John chapter 6, the background on this story was very clear. The disciples had just went through what I would call one of the most amazing revival services possibly ever. It was very clear that it was a healing service. So right on the heels of this, we come into this situation of the feeding of the 5,000. There was a large crowd that followed Jesus and his disciples. He said 5,000 men. The bottom line is, scholars say it was 5,000 men, but when you throw the boys and girls and women in, it was probably 15,000 people that were sitting on this hillside. So it certainly looked like there could be a potential need here. Well, the need was 15,000 grumbling stomachs. Everybody got hungry basically at the same time. So everyone was seated. Jesus then looks to the disciples, and Philip's response was simply this. Remember when I read it? Philip said, "Hey, Jesus, you just healed all these people. You can take care of the feeding situation." That's not what he said, right? He said basically this. He said it would take more than a half year's pay to feed these people, and if we had the half year's pay, they'd only get one bite. So Philip just came off the heels of this great revival, and yet there had to have been some faith expanded there, and yet Philip was here. I guess I call this kind of the pessimistic faith, so to speak, but before we throw Philip under the bus, so to speak, all of us have a little bit of Philip in us. Huh? I mean, how many times things have been going really well for us, the curveball comes, and then it's the end of the world as we know it. We've all been there before, but it's very clear. I mean, he just had an eye full of healings, and yet this situation arises, and it looks like there's nothing that can be done. And Jesus said this was a test because, I love this one, because he already knew what he was going to do. That's the beauty of all this. Even then when we're faced with needs or we see great needs, God already knows what he's going to do. Are we willing to step out and use the faith that we do have? We all need to realize this, that we can have some of Philip in us, but our faith continually needs to be positive. If we aren't careful, life can become nothing but a negative. Somebody said it this way: a man with Limburger cheese on his upper lip thinks the whole world stinks. And if we're not careful, we can walk around this world thinking that everything stinks, and there might be some things in it that stinks, but the bottom line is we've got to be able to see Jesus in the midst of our challenge, in the midst of the needs that we are faced with. I thought about this and just in the idea of just church leaders that I've been around over the years when it comes to meeting needs in their community. And I remember one church leader in particular, he said this. He said, "Kent, our church is willing to do anything short of sinning to see our church grow and meet needs in our community." Now, I kind of like that kind of faith and attitude. Yet on the other side of the coin, I remember one time talking to a pastor. His church was situated literally right across the street from a school. So when I got there, our heart is, how can we help rural churches minister to their local schools? So I said to the pastor, I go, "Hey, what are you doing with the school? How are you helping the school?" And he kind of looked at me with just the strangest look. And he said, "Are you kidding? The school across the street?" He said, "We've been fighting with them for a decade." And then he said this, which really kind of got me ticked off, actually. He said this: "Furthermore, we wouldn't want those kids messing up our foyer." Ouch. Now, you tell me, which church of those two do you think's running about 100 and the other one's running under 10? Yeah, a lot of the times it's, are we solution-driven or are we problem-driven? Well, it looks like, at least at this point, Philip was a little bit more on the problem-driven as far as he couldn't see what was going to take place. And the big mistake that Philip made was when we leave God out of the equation, virtually everything becomes a problem. Isn't that the case? When we leave God out, he just left Jesus out of the equation, and then all of a sudden this is an impossible situation. And we've got to think in that way. Not too long ago, well, I guess it's been several years though, we were engaged with a church through a training in Greenville, Missouri. And at that point in time, basically, they had about 10 people in their church. And you probably could have called the church, if you wanted to maybe, a 5-biscuit and 2 sardine church. I mean, there wasn't a lot of people in the church, but they were wanting to engage in their community, and they wanted to be basically not problem-driven, but solution-driven. And so they came to the training and they decided that they had 2 really big issues in their community. One of them was their local school system, just had a lot of issues. And the other one was, in this little town in Greenville, population about 500-ish, is that they are known as the meth capital of the Boot Hill, not the math capital, the meth capital. It was known as a druggie town of just a few hundred people. So what they did was they decided, well, if we're going to be solution-driven, let's find out what the need in the school is. And the principal told them a few needs, but they only had 10 people. So the first thing that they did was they decided they'd send just a couple of people in to be reading buddies at the school. That was their first entrance into the school. So that was kind of what, if you want to say it this way, the 5 biscuits and the 2 sardines. They were just given that lunch bucket to the school in that way. And they called their ministry Half-Hour Heroes. Play this out some 10 years. Now they got a youth center downtown Greenville. They'll have over 100 kids there on a Friday night. But it started the need. They had to be need-driven to get to where they are. In fact, now when the kids have good attendance at school, the principal sends the kids to Faith Assembly's youth center. That's kind of interesting, isn't it? Drug issue, they decided, hey, we want to be solution-driven, so they developed a program somewhat like Celebrate Recovery, and because they knew that if they are going to touch people in the community, that some of them are going to have drug issues and they need to be discipled. And so the bottom line there was they created a great relationship with a local judge, and now, play this out a few years, it's not unusual when somebody comes before that judge with a drug-related charge, that judge, part of the sentence is he sends them to Faith Assembly Celebrate Recovery program on Wednesday night. Now, you're doing something right solution-wise, would just be true. If the local principal's sending kids to your youth center and a local judge sending people to your midweek service, what do you think? And so it always pays for us to recognize needs, but the second question might be is, what are we going to do about the needs once they come? Well, Philip was kind of pessimistic. Look at this second question as I see in this storyline. Are we looking for possible resources? Are we looking for possible resources? It was clear Philip saw it as an impossibility, but if you look at John 6:8, enter Andrew. And he spoke up, and I thought this was kind of interesting. Here's a boy with 5 barley loaves, 5 biscuits, 2 fish, 2 sardines. How far will they go among so many? So here's the boy with at least some kind of food. Now, I would say that Andrew's faith wasn't quite perfect. I call it potential faith, but at least he was looking for food. Right? I mean, at least he was out there scrounging, trying to find something, and that tells me something about Andrew. Remember the old song, "Little is much when God is in it"? That'll probably tell some age here, but I remember that song, man, when that was sung. But that really is the truth. It isn't like we have to have everything together for God to use us, right? I mean, it is. It's sometimes our lives represent the 5 biscuits and the 2 sardines, because that's how sometimes we feel about things. God is the master at using insignificant things to get His purposes accomplished. I really believe that. I remember talking to a North Texas district staff member who kind of helped us in the process of doing trainings in North Texas. We've done dozens of trainings over the years there. But he lived in a small town, and he said, I set these trainings up and all this, but he said, I feel like I need to be doing something in my own town just as a believer to help the local school. He really had a heart for the local school. So he goes to that local school, and it's a very small school, but he just asked, what are the needs in the school? And this was a school, I'd never heard of this before, maybe you have. This school did not have a library in it. I've never heard of such a thing, not having a library. And I still remember him telling me the story, and he said, I just said it without even thinking. He goes, I'm going to get a library for you. And after he said it, he was like, why did I say that? So he said, I committed myself to it, and he thought, well, I'm just going to go find some books. And then I still remember him telling me when he got a few books put together, it was far from a library. It was 5 biscuits and 2 sardines. And he thought, he called me. Now, I don't have any line on books, but isn't this how God works? Is that when he started talking to me more and more about it, I thought, way back when, this would be in the 80s, when Judy and I were youth pastors in Normal, Illinois, there was a young lady that came to the Lord while we were youth pastors, and she now works for a really well-known book company, and she was up the ladder a little, and I just thought, you know what? I guess I could call Julie. can't hurt. We've been Facebook friends and different things. I get a hold of Julie. Julie kind of sends the need up the ladder. And before we know it, after a few weeks, they have 3,000 books in their library. I mean, I'm telling you, it might only be 5 biscuits and 2 sardines, but if we give it to God, God can do a lot with it. If we don't give that, what we do have to God, I can tell you this, everything's going to be an impossibility. Nothing's going to work the way we want it to work. Go to that next slide. Here's just a couple of quotes. I think they're good quotes. If you do little things like they're big things, God will do big things like they're little things. Mark Batterson. And then Mother Teresa, if you can't feed 100 people, how about just feeding one? I like that one too. Because oftentimes is that we get in our mind, well, we can't do this, it's so large. What are you doing with the one need that you can possibly offer your lunch bucket towards? That's really the question of the day. What I find out is that as we offer that 5 biscuits and 2 sardines to God, oftentimes other things open up. Isn't that the way it works? But it's not until we offer that do we find that to be the case. Go to the next slide. Last time I was here, you probably know me as the net guy. You can throw that to me. I won't spend much time on this. But if you remember, I'd throw out the net and all that. And the whole idea here is that as we throw out the net, make that contact with people, then God seems to do things. And it's not until we release our faith, until we find out that God actually does things. Throw out the net and see what happens, John 21:6. So I want us to think about it in that way. One of the churches that we worked with, and I thought this was kind of interesting, they didn't have many money as far as in their outreach fund. In fact, they had 0 in it. But they came up with this idea, and I thought, hey, it was just a start. And they thought, every month we want to just have the church, one month bring in bottled water, another month bring in boxes of Kleenex, and this, that type of thing for the school system. So every month they had an emphasis, and then they just bring what they had to the school. And I think the first thing they did was bottle water, and it was a small church, and it didn't have momentum the first time around, and I think they got like 3 cases of water. So again, it was almost like, 5 biscuits and 2 sardines, but they took that to the school. It opened up a whole different opportunity for them to minister, and every month that thing built, and now that church is at a place where if there's something difficult going on at the school, first call is the church. Isn't that interesting? Again, it was offered up, and God did what only God can do, and that is open doors. It's so important for us to realize and think about it in that way. Go to that next slide. One of the things that we like to do is we like to resource churches. Certainly, you guys have been on that end of things, at least to some degree. I believe you've done the shoes, you've probably done some backpacks. I know that several trucks have come your way over the years. But as like anything, the next slide, there's some of the resources. I've talked about it before. But as we started in the process as a missions organization. I remember in every one of these cases, you can tell what we've done with backpack, shoes, Hero Bibles, and socks. I remember the first time that we scratched and clawed for the first 100 backpacks. To us, that was 5 biscuits and 2 sardines. And if somebody would have told me, after several years you're going to have over 100,000 backpacks go in rural America, I probably would have been more like Philip. I don't know that that's going to happen. But God, right? And so we never can minimize what God wants to do. In fact, we brought around 625 actually, socks for you to bless whoever you want to with over these next few weeks, and we're looking forward to seeing how God will use that. Look at me. I'm about 6'. I'm going to turn 65 on Sunday, so I might be 5'5". I think you don't grow. No, forget it. I don't even want to go there. Okay. I wasn't any taller in high school. And actually in high school, I probably only weighed about 120, dripping wet, is my guess. I've gained a few pounds since then. But I do remember this so very well. When sports came around, again, look at me. I'm not going to slam dunk or anything along that line, but I like sports. But by virtue of the fact that our school was so small, my class had 20 kids in it, and every class was pretty much the same, that a lot of the times the coach just needed a warm body. Anderson, get in there. But I can tell you one thing that I didn't like, and that was to be on a sports team and sit on the bench while somebody else was on the playing field. You don't think this might preach? Huh? I believe, and it's sad to say this because I've been doing this missionary work for 17 years in America. From what I can see, there are a lot of Christians in America that are very satisfied with sitting on the bench and not being on the playing field. They'd rather watch somebody on the playing field than be a part of the playing field. And I can tell you this, Christians that are involved in offering their 5 biscuits and 2 sardines, they're on the playing field. And that's half the battle right there. Are we willing to be on the playing field? Let's go to the next question here. I think it's the next slide. Third question. Third question is, are you giving God, that's the good one, what you do have? You say, well, I don't have much, but my question is, that isn't even my question. Are you giving God what you do have? That's a legitimate question as such. Are you willing to do that? John 6, 10, and 11, it was very clear. Jesus did take the 5 biscuits and 2 sardines, the loaves and fishes, then He blessed them, and you know what happened from there. God is the master of making insignificant things significant. Obviously, the little boy gave over his lunch bucket to Jesus. It's very, very clear. I thought of this in relationship to a great Old Testament story, the story of Moses. Remember when God wanted Moses to lead the children of Israel out of Egypt? And Moses gave him basically a laundry list of reasons why he couldn't be the person to do that. I mean, I'm not qualified, I don't have the training, I'm not equipped, I'm not an orator, I can't speak well. And then God finally says to Moses, what's in your hand? And he said, a rod. And God says, throw it down. And remember, he threw it down, turned into a snake, then he reached down and... But that was the process. It was a rod. It was basically, again, 5 biscuits and 2 sardines. That was what he had in his hand. The rod was insignificant, but God used it along with Moses' faith. That's the issue. Think about Moses' faith in that rod. That rod literally brought water from a rock and quenched the thirst of hundreds of thousands of people. It wasn't the rod itself, but it was the faith behind the rod, but it was what he had in his hand. It opened up the Red Sea, remember that? The Israelites escaped Egypt towards the Promised Land, all because God used what Moses had. The rod was a symbol of Moses' faith. Moses gave God his proverbial 5 biscuits and 2 sardines. Throughout the Bible, God has had a wonderful habit of whatever a person possessed, if they yielded it to Him, God used it. Think about it. God used a sling. He used some perfume, a coat, a fish, a couple of coins, a jawbone, 5 stones, a mustard seed, a handful of meal and oil, a cloud the size of a man's hand, and He created the miraculous out of the mundane. Isn't that interesting? How about this? 5 biscuits, 2 sardines, a little boy who was willing to give his lunch bucket to Jesus. And 15,000 people were fed with leftovers. Are you willing to give God your lunch bucket, your gift, your talents, your time, your resources? They may be limited. I'm not going to argue with that. They may be. But God can do a lot with very, very little if we simply offer that to Him. Groesbeck, Texas is a storyline I've told this church a few times, but I know I haven't told this story. And again, they started very simply. They had a church of under 20, but wanted to, again, offer what they did have to the school system. And they started with very small things like bringing some bottled water and Kleenexes and various things like that to the school. But as that progressed and they offered up, again, their proverbial 5 biscuits and 2 sardines, the opportunities to minister came to the point where they have put shoes on every kid in their school system. Backpacks out of hundreds and hundreds. I mean, it's an unbelievable storyline. But 3 years ago, the principal calls Pastor John and says this, and they've been engaged with the school for now 7 years, I guess it's probably at that time. He said, hey, we're having high school graduation coming up. One, I'd like for you to speak, and two, I'd like for your church to get high school graduation Bibles for the seniors, for the senior class. John didn't ask him, the principal asked him. Can you put a Bible in their hands? Can you believe that one? It wouldn't have happened if that first meager 5 biscuits and two sardines were given. And he said, sure, we'll do what we can. And anyway, the storyline goes that they gave every one of the seniors Bibles. They've done that now for the last 3 years. But that first year, there was a young lady that took one of the Bibles, not a church kid. I don't know that she's ever read the Bible much, but she took it with her to college. And nobody knew this, but she was in a very deep depression, so much so that she was in her dorm room one night, had pills in front of her, ready to kill herself, and she looked up and saw that Bible and thought to herself, what can it hurt? I got nothing else. I'm going to start reading the Bible. She read the Bible, long story, very, very short. The young lady's now in Chi Alpha at Texas A&M. All because that church started with a bottle of water. It would have never went to that point if that wasn't offered in the first place. Isn't that really quite interesting? Go to the next slide. Who would have ever thought this, that we'd have a toilet paper shortage in 2020? I think I can catch it. Most of you, if you're young at all, if you're older, I might have to explain this, but do most of you know what this is? Yeah, you'd never think that a missionary is going to talk about a poop emoji in church, right? But here's the storyline. I'll tell it quick. Convoy of Hope somehow got, I think, at least a semi-load or more of these. We never know what we're going to get at the warehouse. My personal opinion is that the higher-ups at Convoy said, what do we got? We got this. Give it to the rural guys. They'll figure it out. And that's kind of, I think that's what happened personally, okay? And when we first got it, it was like, what in the world are we going to do with this? And then we started brainstorming, but most of these, for whatever the reason, went down to Texas. But this is what a few of the Texas churches did with, we're talking about 5 biscuits and 2 sardines here, huh? Who would ever think this could be used, right? And so that one of the churches did this. They put this label with the poop emoji. We wanted to kiss you with kindness because with all the hard work you do, you must be pooped. And that was to teachers, and they gave candy kisses along with this. Another one, I think this was to first responders, used the verse Galatians 6:9, let us not become weary in doing good. For a proper time you'll reap a harvest if you don't give up, so if you don't poop out. Got that one? And then the last one is a church in Texas decided they'd take a roll of toilet paper to everybody in town. It's a very, very small church. And I just thought this kind of with the poop emoji, and their label on there is, we stinkin' love you. Isn't that a good one? And I can tell you that I can't understand this, and I'm not even going to try to argue theology on this one of how you use something as insignificant as this, but that church has 3 or 4 families in it from that. So I don't understand it, but it could be meager. It might be what you don't think you could use or God could use, but God could use it, right? I think Jesus spit on the ground and put a couple of mud pieces together, healed somebody's eyes. Remember that one? I mean, that's kind of unorthodox, right? I mean, I would think that's a little unorthodox as such. So one never knows how God is going to use. Go to that next slide, and I'll just do this quick, because one of the things was when COVID hit, for we as missionaries, it was like a deal breaker. We travel, and it got shut down. So we were like, what's going to happen? And this is what happened during 2020 through Rural Compassion. Typically, we'll have 35 trucks go out through rural America. Look how many went out. Over 400. And actually, Kansas got 10% of those trucks. I might add that. There was probably over 40 trucks came to Kansas alone, which is kind of interesting in itself. 5 million meals. Well, you can read that. The bottom line is we did the figuring, and we did more ministry during COVID than we did the previous 16 years. But God. See, God didn't care there was a pandemic. He cared, but I'm saying it didn't stop God from doing something, right? 15,000 people on the hillside, they're all hungry, but God. Huh? 5 biscuits, 2 sardines. You never know what could come out of it. 4th question. I think that's it, and then we'll kind of wrap things up here in the next 10 minutes. Are you allowing God to work, and are you doing your part? Because really, when you look at the storyline, God did work, obviously. Everybody was fed, there was leftovers. But there was also the disciples' part. They've kind of organized the event. If you read through that, they were the ushers and they delivered the food and then they picked the food up. Typically, anything that happens through our lives to meeting somebody's need, God's got a part and we've got a part. We can't expect God just to do everything, because we've got a part in whatever God wants to do, and we've got to see it that way. Every miracle is a combination of God and us. It reminded me of the story of the farmer with a city slicker friend who'd never been out to the farm, and he came out to his farm, and he looked over the farm, and this farmer had really done a beautiful job with just this whole landscaping and the fields. It was when everything was green, and the city slicker said, my, look what God created. And the old farmer said, you should have seen it before I got a hold of it. And I think God's creation was there, but the farmer still had to do something. You follow me on that? And so I think it's the same thing with anything that we do. We've got to see it in that way. Here's a great story of God and the church. Go to that next slide. Oh, that's you guys. Oh, that's the Natoma flood. Do you guys remember that? Huh? Do you talk about 5 biscuits and 2 sardines? I still remember, Judy and I were in Nebraska, I believe, and we were eye-teeth up till doing a lot of things, and Chris got a hold of me, I think through a text, and said, hey, is there anything that we could do in Natoma? And I didn't even know at that time what was going on there. It's kind of the long story short, we'll make it quick, is that, I said, hey, let me find out something. I'll give you an email, you send an email. And it was within 48 hours, and there was a truck in Natoma. And I can tell you this straight up. Sometimes you think it's these small things that can turn into a very large thing very quick. I can tell you this straight up. Nobody in Natoma will ever forget what took place during that time when you guys showed up with that truck. It was a small beginning. Hey, can we do anything? The reason I like it, the storyline even more, is that my guess is you don't have 3,000 people coming from Natoma to church here. Yeah, I don't even know if you have anybody. So this isn't anything that you guys were doing that this is going to really help you in the long run. But when it helps people, it doesn't matter, right? You offer up what you have and allow God to do it. And this is really personal for Judy and I, because Judy's brother lives in Natoma. And you guys helped him, along with his wife's family. Some of you probably don't even know that. So it was like, man, I was like, yeah, Agra, man, they are something else. Heartland, they're the best. I didn't ever think that another church would be helping my own family. And you guys did. So we just wanted to tell you thanks. I had to add that in there just because I think it's a great storyline. Go to there. I got 2 more slides and we'll close. I think it's 2 more. Sometimes miracles are good people with kind hearts that God sends your way. Isn't that the truth? And that's really what you did in Natoma. You just had kind hearts, and that was a miracle in so many ways of helping people in that situation. Go to that second to the last slide, but I'll focus in on this. I like this storyline. I haven't told the story very often, but it kind of popped into my mind while I was studying for this sermon. I call it God and 2 cans of goat's milk powder. And this took place in Texas after a training. I don't know how many pallets, but we had quite a few pallets of goat's milk powder. And I remember it was kind of like, I understand what it is, but I didn't know if it was that somebody actually needed it that much. I kind of read up about it. I did find out that those cans, it wasn't this brand. I just found that on the internet. But the brand of cans that we had this powder they were like $60 a can. I had no idea that's the case, and we had cases of these. So, it was hundreds and hundreds, and I guess it'd be thousands of dollars of powder. And so every pastor took some of these home at the end of the training. And our prayer was kind of like, God, you can help each one of these churches come up with a plan. Well, one of the churches just decided they were going to do this. They really didn't know what to do with it, but they thought, let's just go door to door, kind of 2 by 2, with these cans of goat's milk powder, and let's just find out if anybody needs them or wants them. We can just do it that way and see how many that we can do before we put something on Facebook or whatever else. The pastor and a friend of his, one of the first homes that they went to, they walk in there again. They're kind of feeling like they've got, 5 biscuits and 2 sardines. And knock on the door. The door opens up. A single mom comes to the door. They didn't know who lived there. She comes to the door. They're standing there with their goat milk powder in their hand, kind of smiling. How are you doing? She looks down, sees it. She begins to just bust out crying. And they're like, what in the world? That's what they're thinking to themselves. What did we do to this lady? We haven't even really said anything to her yet. And then she said this through her tears. She said, I'm a single mom. You don't know me. I don't have finances like I should. I need goat's milk powder. I just ran out. Tell me that wasn't a good time to be at the doorstep with some goat milk powder. You never know how God will use what you have, but He never will use it if you don't release it. If you don't allow Him to bring something out of what little maybe talent you feel like you have or gifting you have. All of us have time, which might be our most important commodity, our finances, whatever it is. If we aren't allowing God to touch it and expand it, it isn't going to go any further than us. And every time I think of that storyline, I think, what would be the odds that they would show up on that lady's doorstep almost the day of she ran out of it? I mean, it'd have to be 1 in a billion. I'm just guessing. I'm not a Vegas guy. But it'd have to be pretty long odds. At the very least, we could say that, right? And I just want to encourage you, thank you for what your church is doing beyond the 4 walls of the church. But I also know this, that we need to continue doing that, and we need to build on what we're doing. But I don't know about you, but I just feel like you want to be a church that ends up on the doorstep. Ends up on the doorstep, or in the grocery store, on the golf course, at the school, at the point and moment when somebody has the need that you don't even know about, but you're there to offer what meager things you have to them to meet them at their point of need. I don't know. I just want to do this. I want to take my 5 biscuits and 2 sardines and make a difference in somebody's life. What about you? What about you? Lord, I just thank you so much for Heartland Worship Center. I thank you, God, for their heart for people beyond themselves. And I really do believe the whole Natoma story is just a storyline of somebody willing to give away from themselves with really nothing in return other than the satisfaction of helping meet people's needs. And that is something that we get in return. There's something divine and dynamic about serving others. It's because, Jesus, you were the greatest servant. You didn't come to this world to be served, but you did serve. That's what you were all about. So I'm just praying, God, bless this church, bless their efforts, give them new and fresh ideas of reaching their community. And Lord, I thank you. I just pray a blessing too on the church for their kindness to us over the years, their prayer support, their friendship, their financial support. I just pray, God, that you'll continue to use them to be a blessing to missionaries around the world. God, we just give ourselves to you. We give ourselves to your plan and purpose for our lives. And again, God, we just pray, Lord, this week, God, may we show up on the doorstep of somebody in need and help us to recognize that fact. And we're just going to be willing to offer up the 5 biscuits and 2 sardines that we do have to encourage them and point them towards you. We give you all the praise. We give you all the thanks. In Jesus' name we pray. We say, amen, amen.